The sleek black car pulled up to the curb of Pine Grove Children's Home, its polished surface reflecting the autumn sunlight. Several staff members peered through the windows, whispering among themselves. It wasn't every day that one of the richest men in the city paid them a visit. Richard Hayes stepped out of the car, his expensive suit perfectly tailored to his tall frame. At 52, his hair had turned silver at the temples, giving him a distinguished look that matched his reputation as a business genius. What most people didn't know was that his cold eyes and tight smile had earned him another nickname behind closed doors, the stone-hearted millionaire. Mr. Hayes, what an honor to have you with us today. Mrs. Chen, the director of Pine Grove, rushed forward with an outstretched hand. Her cheerful voice did little to mask her nervousness. Richard gave her hand a brief shake. Let's make this quick. I have a board meeting at 2. Of course, Mrs. Chen nodded, leading him toward the main entrance. We're so grateful you accepted our invitation. As you know, our winter fundraising campaign. I'm aware of why I'm here, Richard cut her off. His foundation's public relations team had insisted on this visit. A few photographs with orphaned children would soften his image after that nasty article in the Business Journal called his latest corporate takeover heartless and predatory. Just smile for a few pictures, hand over a modest check, and be on his way. That was the plan. The halls of Pine Grove were clean but worn. The building had clearly seen better days. Colorful artwork hung on the walls, most of it created by small, unpracticed hands. Richard glanced at them without interest as Mrs. Chen led him through the tour, pointing out classrooms and activity spaces. We currently house 34 children, ranging from ages 4 to 17, she explained, walking briskly to keep up with his long strides. Many have been with us for years. Finding permanent homes becomes more challenging as they get older. Richard nodded absently, checking his watch. 20 minutes had already passed. How much longer would this take? And this is our recreation room, Mrs. Chen said as they entered a large open space. Several children looked up from their activities, their eyes widening at the sight of a stranger in an expensive suit. Some of the younger ones whispered and giggled behind their hands. Richard's gaze swept across the room, taking in the worn furniture, the bookshelf with dog-eared books, and the table tennis set with a slightly torn net. In the corner sat something unexpected, a grand piano. Unlike everything else in the building, it appeared to be of excellent quality, though a thin layer of dust covered its surface. That's an impressive instrument, Richard remarked, the first genuine interest he'd shown during the tour. As a businessman who recognized value, he could tell the piano was worth more than most of the other furnishings combined. Mrs. Chen's face brightened. Yes, it was donated by a local music school that closed last year. Beautiful, isn't it? Unfortunately, none of our current staff knows how to play, and we can't afford a music teacher right now. That's actually one of the programs we hope to fund with... May I? Richard interrupted, walking toward the piano without waiting for permission. He ran his fingers along the polished wood, leaving tracks in the dust. Opening the fallboard, he pressed one key, then another. The notes rang clear and true. Someone had at least kept it tuned. What a waste, he muttered, loud enough for Mrs. Chen to hear. I beg your pardon? A fine instrument like this sitting unused. Richard closed the fallboard with a sharp snap. Typical of places like this. Good intentions, poor execution. Mrs. Chen's smile faltered. Mr. Hayes, we do the best we can with limited resources. If your foundation could consider. My foundation receives dozens of funding requests every month, Richard said dismissively. Everyone has their hand out, Mrs. Chen. A flicker of annoyance crossed the director's face, quickly masked by professional courtesy. Perhaps you'd like to meet some of the children? They've prepared a small presentation, knowing you were coming today. Richard checked his watch again. I really don't have time for... It would mean the world to them, Mrs. Chen pressed. Just 5 minutes. They've been practicing all week. With a resigned sigh, Richard nodded. Mrs. Chen clapped her hands, gaining the attention of the children scattered throughout the room. Everyone, please welcome our special guest, Mr. Hayes. Remember the song we practiced? The children quickly arranged themselves in a semicircle. There were about 15 of them, ranging from small, gap-toothed youngsters to gangly teenagers trying to look unimpressed. They began singing a simple thank you song, their voices a mix of enthusiastic and shy. Richard stood stiffly, his smile not reaching his eyes. This was exactly the kind of scenario his PR team had wanted, him surrounded by grateful orphans. He could almost see the caption now. Business tycoon shows his softer side. Nauseating but necessary. As the children finished their song, Richard gave a perfunctory round of applause. Very nice, he said flatly. Mrs. Chen beamed as if he'd offered high praise. Children, Mr. Hayes is a very important businessman who might help our home with some much-needed improvements. Does anyone have questions for our guest? A small boy raised his hand. Are you a billionaire? Several staff members gasped, but Richard let out a dry laugh. Not quite yet. Another child, a girl with braided hair, asked, Do you have kids? Richard's expression hardened slightly. No, why not? The same girl pressed. Lily, Mrs. Chen warned. It's fine, Richard said, though his tone suggested otherwise. I never found the time or the need for children. My companies are my legacy. The children looked at him with confused expressions. The concept of not wanting children seemed foreign in a place where each child desperately wanted to be wanted. Any other questions? Mrs. Chen asked quickly, sensing the growing discomfort. A thin boy of about 10 raised his hand. Will you help fix our leaky roof? The directness of the question caught Richard off guard. Before he could answer, Mrs. Chen stepped in. Tommy, that's not appropriate. Mr. Hayes hasn't made any decisions about— It's a fair question, Richard interrupted. He looked at the boy, then at Mrs. Chen. Your funding proposal mentioned several infrastructure issues. I'll have my team review it. It was a non-answer, and everyone old enough to understand knew it. As Richard prepared to wrap up this increasingly uncomfortable visit, his eyes fell on a girl sitting alone by the window. Unlike the others, she hadn't joined the group for the song. She appeared to be around 12, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. While the other children were now chattering excitedly, she remained silent, gazing out at the autumn leaves. Who's that? Richard asked, nodding toward the solitary figure. Mrs. Chen followed his gaze. That's Olivia. She came to us about 3 years ago after losing her family in an accident. She's very bright but keeps to herself most of the time. Something about the girl's isolation resonated with Richard, though he quickly dismissed the feeling. She didn't participate in your little performance. Olivia tends to avoid the spotlight, Mrs. Chen explained softly. She's still working through her grief, I think. Richard snorted. Or perhaps she recognized the performance for what it was, an attempt to manipulate a potential donor's emotions. Mrs. Chen's face flushed. Mr. Hayes, that's not fair. The children were genuinely excited to— Please. Richard cut her off with a wave of his hand. I wasn't born yesterday, Mrs. Chen. This whole visit is a choreographed appeal for money. I understand the game. The recreation room had grown quiet. Several staff members exchanged uncomfortable glances, and even the children sensed the sudden tension. Richard glanced again at the dusty piano, then at the quiet girl by the window. A sudden mischievous idea struck him, one that would end this tiresome charade and perhaps teach Mrs. Chen a lesson about transparent manipulation. You know what? He said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I've been considering adoption for some time now. The statement hung in the air like an explosion. Mrs. Chen's mouth fell open, and whispers erupted among the children. You have, Mrs. Chen finally managed, her disbelief evident. Indeed, Richard continued, warming to his joke. In fact, I think I'll make a declaration right now. He walked over to the piano and placed his hand on its dusty surface. This fine instrument needs a proper home, as do many of these children. So here's my offer. If any child in this room can sit down right now and play this piano, truly play it, not just pound on the keys, I'll adopt them on the spot. Gasps and excited murmurs filled the room. Several of the younger children looked at each other with wide eyes, while the older ones appeared skeptical. Richard smiled coldly, knowing he had made an impossible offer. None of these children would have had access to piano lessons. The staff looked horrified at his mockery disguised as generosity. His eyes deliberately found the quiet girl by the window, Olivia, who had finally turned to look at the commotion. Their eyes met briefly before she looked away. Well, Richard spread his hands wide. Any takers, no? What a shame. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her professional demeanor cracking. Mr. Hayes, this is highly inappropriate. These children have been through enough without having their hopes raised, and— It was merely a hypothetical scenario, Mrs. Chen, Richard replied smoothly. A thought experiment, if you will. No harm done. But the damage was evident in the faces around him. The mixture of disappointment and hurt in the younger children, the anger in the teenagers, the tight-lipped fury of the staff. Richard checked his watch one final time. Well, it seems my time is up. Thank you for the tour. My office will be in touch regarding your proposal. As he turned to leave, he caught sight of Olivia again. She was no longer looking out the window, but staring directly at the piano, an unreadable expression on her face. For a brief moment, Richard felt a flicker of something uncomfortably like shame. He quickly dismissed it. These weren't his children, and their disappointment wasn't his concern. He had businesses to run, deals to close, money to make. As he walked briskly toward the exit with Mrs. Chen hurrying after him, Richard Hayes had no idea that his callous joke would change his life forever. That night, long after the other children had fallen asleep, Olivia lay awake in her bed staring at the ceiling. The moonlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting soft shadows across the room she shared with 3 other girls. Their gentle breathing filled the silence, but Olivia's mind was far too busy for sleep. She couldn't stop thinking about the piano. Or more precisely, she couldn't stop thinking about the man who had mockingly offered adoption to anyone who could play it. Richard Hayes. She had recognized him immediately from newspaper photos and TV appearances. The wealthy businessman whose name appeared on buildings and charity galas. The man whose cold eyes had swept over the children like they were items at an auction, valued only for how they might benefit him. Olivia turned onto her side, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. 3 years had passed since the accident that took her parents. 3 years of learning to live without her mother's gentle laugh and her father's strong, comforting presence. 3 years of trying to belong somewhere new. Mrs. Chen and the other staff at Pine Grove were kind enough. They made sure the children were fed, clothed, and educated. But kindness wasn't the same as family. Nothing could replace what Olivia had lost. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to remember. Before the accident, music had filled their small apartment. Her mother, Eliza, had been a piano teacher, not famous but deeply respected by her students and fellow musicians. From the time Olivia was 4 years old, the piano had been her playground, her classroom, and her sanctuary. Her mother had guided her small hands across the keys, teaching her to read music before she could read words. Music speaks when words fail, sweetheart. Her mother often said, "It's the language of the soul." After the accident, Olivia had stopped playing. The piano in the music room at her first foster home remained untouched. When she was transferred to Pine Grove and discovered the grand piano in the recreation room, she had deliberately avoided it. Playing would mean remembering, and remembering hurt too much. But tonight something had shifted inside her. The cruel joke made by Richard Hayes had stirred something that had been dormant for 3 years. Not hope for adoption, but a whisper of her mother's voice. Music speaks when words fail. Olivia slipped out of bed, her bare feet silent on the cool floor. She pulled on her robe and carefully opened the bedroom door, wincing at its slight creak. The hallway was dark except for the small nightlights placed at intervals along the baseboards. She moved quietly, avoiding the spots she knew would make noise. After 3 years at Pine Grove, Olivia had memorized every squeaky floorboard, every creaky hinge. The night staff would be in the office near the entrance, far enough away that she wouldn't disturb them if she was careful. The recreation room was bathed in moonlight when she entered. The piano stood in the corner, its dark surface gleaming softly in the pale light. Olivia approached it slowly, as if it might disappear if she moved too quickly. She ran her fingers over the dusty surface, leaving trails in the fine powder. Opening the fallboard, she revealed the keys, ivory and ebony, waiting patiently for someone to bring them to life. Olivia sat on the bench, adjusted its height, and positioned her hands above the keys without touching them. For a moment she hesitated. Would she remember how? Would it hurt too much? She closed her eyes and let her fingers fall gently onto the keys. The first chord was soft, tentative. The second was stronger. By the third, her hands remembered what her mind had tried to forget. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the first piece she had mastered under her mother's guidance. Her fingers moved across the keys as if the 3-year gap had never existed. The music flowed from some deep place inside her, filling the empty room with beauty and memory and pain and healing. Tears streamed down her face as she played, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The music poured out of her like a river breaking through a dam, unstoppable and cleansing. When she finished the nocturne, she moved seamlessly into Bach, then Debussy. Each piece brought back memories of her mother sitting beside her on the bench, of her father listening from his favorite chair, his eyes closed in appreciation. She didn't know how long she played. Time seemed to stand still, measured only in melodies and harmonies. It was only when she heard a soft gasp that she stopped abruptly, her hands freezing above the keys. Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway, one hand pressed to her heart. Behind her was Mr. Patel, one of the night staff members. "Olivia," Mrs. Chen whispered, her voice filled with wonder. I had no idea you could play like that." Olivia lowered her hands to her lap, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm sorry if I woke anyone." No. Mrs. Chen rushed forward, kneeling beside the piano bench. "Don't apologize. It was beautiful." She searched Olivia's face. "Why haven't you played before?" "In all this time." Olivia looked down at her hands. "My mother taught me. After she died, it hurt too much." Mrs. Chen nodded, understanding filling her eyes. "And now?" "It still hurts," Olivia admitted. "But it also feels right. Like she's with me again when I play." Mr. Patel stepped forward, his usually serious face softened with emotion. "My grandmother used to say that music is the bridge between the living and those we've lost. Perhaps your mother found a way to reach you tonight." Olivia smiled faintly, wiping away her tears with the sleeve of her robe. "Maybe she did. That man today, Mr. Hayes," Mrs. Chen said carefully. "His terrible joke upset you, didn't it?" Olivia shook her head. "Not really." He didn't know. No one knew. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them, but when he said that about the piano, something woke up inside me, like my mother was nudging me, telling me it was time to play again. Mrs. Chen squeezed Olivia's hand gently. "Your mother would be so proud of you. You play beautifully. Do you think—" Olivia hesitated, almost afraid to voice the thought. "Do you think he meant it? About adopting someone who could play?" The hope in the girl's voice made Mrs. Chen's heart ache. She exchanged a glance with Mr. Patel, both adults knowing the answer but reluctant to crush Olivia's newfound spark. "Mr. Hayes is a businessman, not a man looking to be a father," Mrs. Chen said gently. What he said was thoughtless and cruel. "I don't want you to get your hopes up, Olivia." Olivia nodded, her expression serious beyond her 12 years. "I understand. I'm not playing because of his promise. I'm playing because I should never have stopped. My mother wouldn't have wanted me to give up something I love because it reminds me of her." Mrs. Chen felt her eyes fill with tears at the girl's wisdom. "You're absolutely right," Mr. Patel cleared his throat. "It's very late. You should get some rest, Olivia. But perhaps tomorrow, if you feel comfortable, you might play for the other children. Music has been missing from Pine Grove for too long." Olivia considered this, then nodded slowly. "I'd like that." As she made her way back to her room, guided by Mrs. Chen, Olivia felt lighter than she had in years. She hadn't realized how much she'd been carrying, not just grief but the weight of denying a part of herself that her mother had nurtured. The next morning, word spread quickly among the children and staff. Olivia could play the piano, really play it. By lunchtime, everyone at Pine Grove knew about her late-night concert. "Will you play for us after lunch?" asked Zoe, the youngest girl in Olivia's room. "Please." Olivia found herself surrounded by curious faces, some hopeful, others skeptical. She had been so quiet for so long that this sudden attention made her uncomfortable, but the memory of last night's release gave her courage. "Okay," she agreed softly. "After lunch." When the time came, the recreation room filled with children and staff. Olivia sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. She chose Mozart this time, something bright and cheerful. The room grew silent except for the music, faces rapt with attention. When she finished, the applause startled her. Children who had barely noticed her before were looking at her with new respect and wonder. Even the teenagers, usually too cool to show enthusiasm for anything, seemed impressed. "That was awesome. How did you learn to do that? Can you teach me?" The questions came from all sides. For the first time since coming to Pine Grove, Olivia felt truly seen. Later that afternoon, as Olivia was helping the younger children with their homework, Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway of the study room. Her face looked strange, excited but nervous. "Olivia, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" Curious, Olivia followed the director to her office. Mrs. Chen closed the door and took a deep breath before speaking. "I just received a phone call," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "From Richard Hayes." Olivia felt her heart skip a beat. "Oh? Apparently one of our staff mentioned you're playing to his assistant. During a follow-up call about funding. Mr. Hayes seemed interested. He's asked to visit again tomorrow." Mrs. Chen watched Olivia's face closely. "He specifically asked if you would be willing to play for him." Olivia's mind raced. Part of her wanted to refuse, remembering the cold mockery in the man's eyes. But another part, the part that had reconnected with the music last night, was curious. "What should I do?" she asked quietly. Mrs. Chen sat down beside her. "That's entirely up to you, Olivia. You don't owe this man anything. His joke was unkind, and I wouldn't blame you for refusing." Olivia thought for a long moment. I think I'll play for him." A small, determined smile crossed her face. "Not because of his promise. Not even for him at all. I'll play for my mother. And for myself." Mrs. Chen nodded, pride shining in her eyes. "Then that's what you'll do. And whatever happens tomorrow, remember that your music is a gift. One that no one can take from you. Not even Richard Hayes." As Olivia went to bed that night, her mind filled with melodies she would choose for tomorrow, she had no idea that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. The following day, Pine Grove Children's Home buzzed with nervous energy. Staff members rushed around, straightening furniture and making sure everything looked presentable. The children had been instructed to wear their cleanest clothes and to be on their best behavior. Even the lunch menu had been upgraded from the usual Tuesday sandwiches to pasta with actual garlic bread, all because Richard Hayes was coming back. Olivia sat by the window in the girls' dormitory, watching a pair of sparrows hop along the branch of the oak tree outside. She had barely slept the night before, her mind filled with a mix of excitement and dread. After breakfast, she had retreated here to gather her thoughts and decide what she would play. A soft knock on the door interrupted her contemplation. "Come in," she called. Mrs. Chen peeked her head in. "How are you feeling, Olivia?" Olivia shrugged. "Nervous, I guess. But okay." Mrs. Chen entered the room and sat on the bed across from Olivia. "You know you don't have to do this. If you've changed your mind, I can call and—" "No," Olivia said firmly. "I want to play. I need to." Mrs. Chen studied the girl's face. Where had this quiet determination come from? The Olivia of last week would have shrunk from any kind of spotlight. Now there was a new steadiness in her eyes. "Have you decided what you'll play?" Olivia nodded. "Debussy's Clair de Lune. It was my mother's favorite." "A beautiful choice," Mrs. Chen said with an approving smile. "Mr. Hayes should arrive around 2 o'clock. We've arranged for you to play in the recreation room just like yesterday, but only staff and a few children will be present. We don't want to make it too overwhelming for you." "Thank you," Olivia said, genuinely grateful for the director's thoughtfulness. Mrs. Chen hesitated, then reached out to squeeze Olivia's hand. "I want you to understand something. No matter what happens today, whether Mr. Hayes is impressed or not, what matters is that you've found your music again. That's the real victory here." Olivia nodded, understanding the gentle warning beneath Mrs. Chen's words. The director was trying to prepare her for disappointment, to protect her from having her hopes crushed if Richard Hayes proved to be as cold and uncaring as he had seemed during his first visit. "I know," Olivia said simply. "I'm not playing for him. I'm playing for myself." The hours ticked by slowly. Olivia tried to focus on her schoolwork, but her mind kept wandering to the upcoming performance. When lunchtime finally arrived, she found she could barely eat, pushing pasta around her plate while her friends chattered excitedly around her. "Do you think he'll really adopt you if you play well?" Zoe asked, her eyes wide with the boundless hope of a 7-year-old. "I don't know," Olivia answered honestly. "Probably not. Grown-ups say things they don't mean sometimes." "But you're the best piano player ever," Zoe insisted with the absolute certainty of childhood. "He'd be crazy not to want you." Olivia smiled at the little girl's loyalty. "We'll see." At 1:45, Mrs. Chen found Olivia in the library, where she had been trying to distract herself with a book. "It's time," the director said gently. "He's arriving early." Olivia took a deep breath, closed her book, and stood up. As she followed Mrs. Chen to the recreation room, she felt surprisingly calm. Whatever happened today, she had already won something precious back: her music, her connection to her mother, a part of herself she had buried for too long. The recreation room had been transformed as much as possible with the limited resources of Pine Grove. The worn furniture had been rearranged to create a performance space, with the piano as the focal point. Someone had polished the instrument until it gleamed, and a small vase of wildflowers sat atop it. About a dozen chairs had been set up, occupied by a few staff members and several children who had been selected to attend, mostly the quieter, better-behaved ones. And there, standing near the window with his back to the room, was Richard Hayes. He turned as Olivia and Mrs. Chen entered, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Hayes," Mrs. Chen said with professional courtesy, "thank you for coming. This is Olivia." Richard's eyes fixed on the girl, studying her with an intensity that made her want to shrink away, but Olivia held her ground, meeting his gaze steadily. "So," he said after a long moment, "I hear you play the piano." "Yes, sir," Olivia replied, her voice quiet but clear. "And quite well, according to my assistant, who spoke with one of your staff." His tone was skeptical. As if he couldn't quite believe it, Mrs. Chen stepped forward. "Perhaps we should let Olivia demonstrate her talent, rather than discussing it." Richard gave a curt nod and took a seat in the front row. Mrs. Chen guided Olivia to the piano with a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Whenever you're ready, dear," she whispered. Olivia sat down at the piano, adjusting the bench to the right height. She placed her hands on the keys and took a deep breath, closing her eyes briefly. In her mind, she pictured her mother sitting beside her, encouraging her as she always had. "Play from your heart. Live, that's where the music lives." She began to play. The opening notes of Claire de Lune filled the room, soft and delicate as moonlight on water. Olivia's small hands moved across the keys with practiced grace, bringing the Debussy masterpiece to life. The gentle, dreamy melody rose and fell, building slowly toward its emotional peak. As she played, Olivia forgot about Richard Hayes and his cruel joke. She forgot about the staff and children watching. She forgot about the dusty recreation room in an underfunded orphanage. There was only the music flowing through her fingers and into the world. When she reached the climax of the piece, her hands dancing across the keys in a cascade of notes, she felt tears on her cheeks but didn't stop. This was for her mother, for the love they had shared, for the gift of music that connected them even now. The final section returned to the gentle theme of the beginning, like a river finding its way back to the sea, and Olivia let the last notes hang in the air before lifting her hands from the keys. For a moment, the room was utterly silent. Then came the sound of a chair scraping back, footsteps crossing the floor. Olivia opened her eyes to find Richard Hayes standing beside the piano, his face transformed. The coldness was gone from his eyes, replaced by something she couldn't quite name. Shock, perhaps, or wonder. His usual mask of indifference had cracked, revealing raw emotion beneath. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. "Where?" His voice cracked and he cleared his throat before trying again. "Where did you learn to play like that?" "My mother taught me," Olivia answered. "She was a piano teacher before she died." Richard seemed unable to look away from her, as if seeing a ghost. "That piece, do you know why you chose it?" Olivia was confused by the question. "It was my mother's favorite. We used to play it together." Richard turned away abruptly, moving to the window. His shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath. When he turned back, his composure had returned, but something in his eyes remained different. "You play beautifully," he said, his voice controlled once more. "Far better than I expected. You've had excellent training." "Thank you," Olivia said simply. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her face hopeful. "Mr. Hayes, we're so pleased you could come and hear Olivia play. As you can see, she's quite talented. We've been discussing the possibility of finding her proper lessons to continue her education. But unfortunately, our budget—" "I'd like to speak with Olivia alone," Richard interrupted, his eyes never leaving the girl's face. Mrs. Chen hesitated, protective instincts flaring. "I'm not sure that would be—" "It's okay," Olivia said, surprising herself with her boldness. "I don't mind." Mrs. Chen looked uncertain but nodded. "Very well. We'll be just outside if you need anything, Olivia." The director ushered the other staff and children out, closing the door behind them but leaving it slightly ajar. Richard waited until they were alone before speaking again. "That piece you played," he said quietly. "My mother used to play it." Olivia watched him carefully, sensing that something important was happening, though she didn't fully understand what. "When I was a boy," Richard continued, his voice distant as if speaking from a dream, "I would sit beside her on the bench, just as you must have sat with your mother. She tried to teach me, but I had no talent for it. No patience." He gave a humorless laugh. "My father said it was a waste of time anyway. Music doesn't pay the bills," he would say. He moved closer to the piano, running his fingers lightly over its surface. "When she died, my father sold her piano. Said there was no point keeping it. I was 14. His eyes refocused on Olivia. "How old were you when you lost your parents?" 9, Olivia answered. Richard nodded as if confirming something to himself. "And yet you still play. Even after everything, you still have the music." "I stopped for a long time," Olivia admitted. "It hurt too much. But now, it's like having a piece of her back." Richard's expression softened, the hard lines of his face relaxing into something more human, more vulnerable. "Would you play something else for me?" he asked, his voice different from before. A request now, not a command. Olivia nodded and turned back to the piano. As her fingers found the keys again, she felt something shift in the room, as if an invisible wall had come down. She began to play Bach's Prelude in C major, and for the first time in a very long time, Richard Hayes closed his eyes and simply listened. In the days following Olivia's performance, Pine Grove Children's Home settled back into its usual routine. Children attended classes, staff managed daily chores, and the ancient heating system clanked and groaned as autumn deepened toward winter. But beneath the surface of normalcy, a current of anticipation ran through the building. Richard Hayes had left that day with little explanation. After Olivia's second piece, he had thanked her quietly, spoken briefly with Mrs. Chen in the hallway, and departed in his sleek black car. No promises, no declarations, no mention of his mocking offer of adoption, yet something had clearly changed. 2 days later, a brand new piano bench arrived, along with sheet music and a note requesting that Olivia continue practicing daily. The following week, a piano tuner appeared, sent by Hayes Enterprises to ensure the instrument was in perfect condition. "What do you think it means?" Olivia asked Mrs. Chen after the tuner left. The director shook her head, her expression cautious. "I'm not sure, Olivia. Mr. Hayes has made a significant donation to our winter fund, and he's arranged for a music teacher to visit twice a week to give you lessons. But beyond that," she hesitated, "I don't want you to set your heart on something that may not happen." Olivia nodded, trying to keep her hopes in check. She understood what Mrs. Chen wasn't saying. Rich men often made charitable gestures without personal involvement. The piano bench, the music teacher, these might simply be tax deductions for a wealthy businessman, not steps toward fulfilling a rashly made promise. Still, as October faded into November, Olivia threw herself into her music with renewed passion. The visiting teacher, Ms. Abernathy, was delighted with her talent and pushed her to tackle more challenging pieces. For the first time in years, Olivia felt herself moving forward rather than simply existing. "You're playing differently now," Ms. Abernathy observed during one lesson. "With more confidence, more joy." Olivia smiled, realizing it was true. The music that had once been painful to remember now brought comfort. Each time she played, she felt closer to her mother, as if they were continuing their lessons across the divide of death. Meanwhile, Richard Hayes found himself increasingly distracted during board meetings and business negotiations. His thoughts kept returning to Pine Grove, to the dusty piano, to the girl whose music had broken through walls he'd built decades ago. "Sir?" His assistant's voice cut through his reverie. "The Tokyo investors are waiting for your decision." Richard straightened in his chair, refocusing on the conference call. "Tell them we'll proceed with the merger on the terms discussed." Later that evening, alone in his penthouse apartment, Richard stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. In one hand, he held a glass of scotch. In the other, a small photograph in a silver frame. The woman in the photo smiled warmly at the camera, one hand resting on the shoulder of a serious-looking boy of about 10. Behind them stood a grand piano. "What would you think of me now, Mother?" Richard whispered to the image. "Would you even recognize the man I've become?" He set the photo down and moved to his desk where a folder lay open. Inside were documents from his legal team, adoption papers, background checks, financial arrangements. Everything necessary to fulfill the promise he had made as a cruel joke, and now found himself considering in earnest. Was he really contemplating this? Taking in a child, becoming a parent at 52? The idea was absurd. He knew nothing about raising children. His life was organized around business meetings and global travel, not school schedules and childhood illnesses. And yet, when Olivia had played that day, something long buried had resurfaced in him. A memory of sitting beside his mother at the piano, feeling safe and valued in a way his father's critical gaze never allowed. The pure joy of music for its own sake. Before profit margins and business strategies consumed his world, Richard closed the folder and picked up his phone. "Get me Mrs. Chen at Pine Grove," he told his assistant, "and clear my schedule for tomorrow afternoon." The next day, a light snow was falling as Richard's car pulled up to Pine Grove. This time there was no welcoming committee, no nervous staff hovering nearby. Only Mrs. Chen waited in her office, her expression carefully neutral as Richard entered. "Mr. Hayes," she greeted him. "This is unexpected. Is she here?" Richard asked without preamble. "Olivia?" Mrs. Chen nodded. "She's in her math class. Should I call for her?" "Please." As Mrs. Chen stepped out to retrieve Olivia, Richard paced the small office, suddenly unsure of himself. What was he doing? What would he even say to the girl? The door opened and Olivia entered, her dark hair pulled back in its usual simple ponytail. She looked smaller somehow in her worn jeans and faded sweater than she had when playing the piano. "Hello," she said quietly. Richard stopped pacing. "Hello, Olivia. How are your lessons with Ms. Abernathy going?" "Really well." A smile touched her lips. "She says I have potential." "She's right." Richard cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you might play for me again today." Olivia nodded. "I'd like that." They moved to the recreation room where the piano waited. The room was empty at this hour, most children still in classes. Olivia sat at the piano while Richard took a seat nearby. "What would you like to hear?" she asked. Richard hesitated. "Whatever you'd like to play. Something that matters to you." Olivia thought for a moment, then began a piece he didn't recognize. Something lively and complex, her fingers dancing across the keys with impressive dexterity. Richard watched her face as she played, noting the subtle expressions that crossed it. Concentration, joy, a flash of triumph at a difficult passage successfully navigated. When she finished, he applauded softly. "That was wonderful." "What was it?" "A piece my mother wrote," Olivia explained. "She composed music sometimes, though she never tried to publish it. This was called Morning Light. She wrote it after we spent a weekend at the beach." Richard felt something tighten in his chest. "Your mother was clearly very talented, like her daughter." Olivia ducked her head, accepting the compliment with shy grace. "Olivia," Richard began, then paused, searching for the right words. "I made a thoughtless comment when I first came here, about adopting someone who could play the piano. I remember," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "It was cruel and I apologize." He met her eyes directly. "But sometimes life has a strange way of turning jokes into truths." Olivia's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Richard leaned forward, his usual businesslike demeanor softening. "I've been thinking a great deal since hearing you play. About music, about family, about second chances." He took a deep breath. "I'm not sure I'd make a very good father. I've spent my life focused on business, not relationships. But if you were willing to take a chance on me, I'd like to try." Olivia stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Are you saying you want to adopt me?" "Yes," Richard said simply. "If you'd be willing to consider it." For a long moment, Olivia was silent, her fingers resting lightly on the piano keys. Then she asked, "Why? Is it just because I can play the piano?" The directness of the question caught Richard off guard, but he appreciated her honesty. "No, though that's what opened the door. When you played your mother's favorite piece, my mother's favorite too, it felt like," he struggled to explain, "like a message perhaps, a reminder of what matters." He stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the falling snow. "I've spent decades building companies, making money, expanding my influence. But to what end? I have no one to share it with, no one to leave it to. My life isn't empty." Turning back to her, he continued, I'm not looking for a piano prodigy to show off at parties. I'm looking for a second chance to build something more meaningful than a business empire. A family, perhaps, even if it's just the two of us. Olivia studied him carefully, wisdom beyond her years in her gaze. What if it doesn't work out? What if you change your mind? A fair question, Richard acknowledged. I can only promise to try my best to learn how to be the kind of parent you deserve. And legally, adoption is permanent. I wouldn't enter into it lightly. He moved back to sit near her, his expression serious. I've spoken with Mrs. Chen about arranging visits first. You could come to my home, see if you'd be comfortable there. We could get to know each other better before making any final decisions. The choice would be yours, Olivia. Every step of the way. Olivia bit her lip, considering. Could I still play the piano? And keep taking lessons? A smile touched Richard's lips. I'd insist on it. In fact, I have my mother's piano in storage. It's been there for almost 40 years. I think it's time it was played again, don't you? For the first time since he'd entered the room, Olivia's face broke into a genuine smile. I'd like that. Richard felt something tight in his chest loosen at the sight of her smile. So would I. Mrs. Chen, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, stepped forward. This is a big decision for both of you. Perhaps we should discuss the practical details of how to proceed. As they walked back to her office, Richard felt Olivia's small hand slip hesitantly into his. He glanced down in surprise, then gently closed his fingers around hers. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Pine Grove's worn exterior with a clean white blanket. Inside, unexpected warmth bloomed between two people who had each been alone far too long. 6 months had passed since the day Richard Hayes made his sincere offer to adopt Olivia. Winter had given way to spring, and spring had blossomed into early summer. The journey had not been easy or straightforward for either of them. The first weekend visit had been awkward. Olivia had arrived at Richard's penthouse apartment with a small backpack containing her few possessions, her eyes wide as she took in the floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art, and sleek furniture that seemed designed for looking at rather than living with. It's very clean, she had said politely, standing stiffly in the center of the living room, afraid to touch anything. Richard, equally uncomfortable, had given her a stilted tour that took less than 10 minutes. The place hadn't been designed with a child in mind. There were no cozy corners for reading, no space dedicated to toys or games, not even a proper guest room, just a home office that had been hastily converted with a new bed and dresser. The only moment of genuine connection had come when Richard had unveiled his mother's piano. The movers had delivered it the day before, and a tuner had spent hours restoring it to perfect pitch. The instrument was beautiful, a baby grand with warm mahogany finish. Its ivory keys yellowed slightly with age, but still perfect to the touch. Olivia had approached it with reverence, running her fingers lightly over the surface. "May I?" she had whispered. "Of course," Richard had replied. "It's been waiting for you." As she played, the stiff formality between them had melted away. The apartment, which had always felt more like a hotel suite than a home to Richard, had suddenly come alive with music and emotion. That first weekend had set the pattern for the months that followed. Each visit brought small improvements. Richard learned to stock the kitchen with foods that Olivia enjoyed. Olivia became more comfortable exploring the apartment, leaving books on side tables and sheet music on the piano. They discovered shared interests beyond music, puzzles, documentaries about ancient civilizations, and a mutual sweet tooth that led to Friday night ice cream tastings. There were setbacks, too. Richard sometimes got caught up in work calls during their weekends together. Olivia had occasional nightmares that left her crying out for parents long gone. They both had moments of doubt, wondering if they were making a mistake. Through it all, Mrs. Chen had been their guide and supporter. She visited regularly to check on Olivia's adjustment, offered Richard advice on parenting a preteen girl, and reminded them both that families were built one day at a time. Now, on a sunny June afternoon, they stood together outside the courthouse. The adoption had just been finalized, the papers signed, the judge's approval granted. Olivia wore a new blue dress for the occasion, her dark hair pulled back with a matching ribbon. Richard had abandoned his usual business suit for more casual slacks and a button-down shirt, looking years younger without his corporate armor. Mrs. Chen hugged them both, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Congratulations," she said, stepping back to look at them. "You two have come so far." "We have," Richard agreed, placing a gentle hand on Olivia's shoulder. "Though we still have quite a journey ahead of us." Olivia looked up at him, her expression a mix of happiness and lingering disbelief that this was really happening. "Where do we go now?" she asked. Richard smiled. "Home. But first I thought we might make a stop." The car took them not to the penthouse apartment but to a tree-lined street in a quieter part of the city. Large houses sat back from the road, each with its own character and charm. The driver pulled up in front of a brick colonial with white shutters and a wide front porch. "What's this?" Olivia asked as they got out of the car. "A possibility," Richard replied. "Would you like to see inside?" The real estate agent was waiting for them, keys in hand. As she led them through the house, Olivia's eyes grew wider with each room. There was a spacious kitchen with a breakfast nook overlooking a backyard garden, a living room with built-in bookshelves and a window seat perfect for reading, 4 bedrooms upstairs including one with bay windows that caught the afternoon sun, and in the formal living room at the front of the house, a perfect alcove sized for a baby grand piano. The family who lived here before had it set up as a music corner, the agent explained. "Great acoustics in this room." Richard watched Olivia as she walked to the center of the alcove, turned slowly, and then looked at him with a question in her eyes. "What do you think?" he asked. "And could this be home?" "For us?" Olivia's voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes, for us." Richard joined her in the alcove. "The penthouse never felt like a proper home even to me. And now there are 2 of us. We need a place where we can both belong." He gestured to the space around them. "Room for your music, space for friends to visit, a backyard for, well, whatever people do in backyards." Olivia laughed at his obvious cluelessness about normal family life. "They have barbecues, and plant gardens, and play games." "Then that's what we'll learn to do," Richard said firmly. "Together." Later, after the agent had left them to discuss the house privately, they sat side by side on the window seat in what could be Olivia's bedroom. "Are you sure about all this?" Olivia asked, her fingers tracing patterns on the wood trim. "The house, the adoption, me?" Richard took a moment before answering, knowing she deserved his complete honesty. "I'm not sure about many things in life, Olivia. I'm not sure I know how to be a good father. I'm not sure I can balance work and family the way I should. I'm not sure I won't make 1,000 mistakes along the way." He turned to face her fully. "But I am sure about you, about us, about trying to build something meaningful together. And I'm sure that when you play the piano, I feel closer to my mother than I have in 40 years. I'm sure that in these past 6 months, my life has had more purpose than in the 20 years before." Olivia nodded, absorbing his words. "I'm scared sometimes," she admitted, "that I'll forget my parents, that I'll mess this up, that it's all too good to be true." "I'm scared too," Richard confessed. "But someone very wise once told me that being brave isn't about not feeling fear. It's about feeling afraid and moving forward anyway." "Mrs. Chen?" Richard smiled. "Actually, it was you. That day when you decided to play for me even though you were nervous." Olivia looked surprised, then pleased that he had remembered. "So we'll be brave together?" "Together," Richard agreed, offering his hand. She took it, and they sat in comfortable silence, looking out at the tree branches swaying in the summer breeze. 3 weeks later, they moved into the house. Richard's sleek modern furniture looked oddly out of place in the warm traditional rooms, leading to laughter and a shopping trip for pieces that better suited their new home. Olivia's few possessions from Pine Grove were supplemented with new clothes, books, and art supplies as she discovered interests beyond music. The piano took pride of place in the front room, positioned perfectly in its alcove. Richard had a custom bench made with storage space underneath for sheet music, and Olivia practiced daily, her talent blossoming under the continued guidance of Ms. Abernathy. One evening in late summer, as golden light streamed through the windows, Richard arrived home from work to find Olivia at the piano. She was playing a piece he hadn't heard before, something gentle and hopeful, with a melody that seemed to ask a question and then answer it. He stood in the doorway, briefcase forgotten in his hand, simply listening. When she finished, he applauded softly. "That was beautiful." "What was it?" Olivia turned on the bench, a mixture of pride and shyness on her face. "I wrote it. It's not finished yet, but it's coming along." "You're composing now?" Richard asked, delighted. She nodded. like my mother did. I thought I'd call it New Beginnings. Richard felt his throat tighten with emotion. He set down his briefcase and came to sit beside her on the bench. It's perfect. Will you play it again? As Olivia's fingers returned to the keys, Richard closed his eyes and listened. In the music, he could hear echoes of pain and loss, but also courage and hope and the promise of joy. It was their story, translated into melody. The story of a thoughtless joke that had somehow, against all odds, led to healing for them both. Outside, neighbors walked dogs and pushed strollers along the tree-lined street. Inside, in a house that was rapidly becoming a home, a new family found its rhythm together, one note at a time.